Josh here, and today I want to talk about the ward mechanic, which was finally explained in the video that was released by Eric's Curiosa on Halloween. So we knew ward existed, but we didn't know what it did. Many people had speculated on what it would do, and I feel like what was revealed to us on Halloween is more involved than what many people expected ward to actually do. So let's get into what it does, and then I'm going to talk about my feelings about this new mechanic. So ward is a token. Many people expected that it would be a token. So like stealth, like lance, it's a token. And then once its effect is used, the ward goes away. So what does ward do? If a warded site or unit would be damaged, destroyed, or targeted by a spell or special ability from your opponent, the ward breaks instead. Evil minions can't have wards. Now, as a reminder, evil minions are demons, monsters, and undead. So those three types of minions cannot have ward. Now let's break this down. First thing that I thought was very interesting, a site can be warded. So if a site is warded and it's going to be destroyed, the ward breaks instead. Makes me wonder, are we going to be getting more site destruction in Sorcery? In addition, because it also breaks if a site is targeted by a spell or special ability, that means that a spell like Lightning Bolt, which targets a site but deals damage to a random minion, would also be stopped by a ward on a site because the lightning bolt has to target that site. Now, what happens to the spell? That's not really explained. My presumption is that if something targets, if you use a spell to target something with ward, then that spell will fizzle and go to the cemetery. That's my guess. That has not been clarified. We don't know if that's the case, but I have to think that would be the case because otherwise I would just do the same thing again once the ward is broken. So I've got to think that has to be the penalty. If you try to cast a spell and target a warded site or unit, then that ward breaks, the spell fizzles and goes to the cemetery. That's my guess. Could be completely wrong, but I don't know how you'd do it any other way. The other thing that's very interesting, it says unit. So that means that your avatar could be warded. I don't think there's really anything in the rules that prevents an avatar from being warded. So this is the question then. Does maybe that savior avatar that we have seen the name of but know nothing else about, does it generate wards for itself or generate wards for allies? That seems appropriate for a savior. So that'll be very interesting to see. And I'm assuming, just based on the rule set we have, it sounds like an avatar can be warded. So how will that change the dynamic of the game, especially in relation to dealing the death blow, assuming that an avatar can benefit from a ward? Since it says unit, it really feels like that's probably going to happen and could change some real dynamics of the game. It won't be, oh, you're on death's door and your opponent can, target you with, the problem, I was going to go to Lightning Bolt, but with Lightning Bolt, you're targeting the site. So, that actually wouldn't really help you because of the way Lightning Bolt is. Man, are we going to get into these? I think we're going to get into weird shenanigans because Lightning Bolt targets a site, but the ward would prevent the damage, right? That's why the explanation for ward is so involved. Damage, destroyed, or targeted by a spell or special ability. All those things apply. So if your avatar is warded on a site at death's door, your opponent plays lightning bolt, they can target the site. The site's not warded, no problem there. If it was, it would be a problem, and the lightning bolt would be stopped. But then, assuming your avatar is the only thing there, it would try to take damage. That would break the ward and prevent the damage. At least I think that's how all that's going to work. That sounds right. So all of that, lengthy, involved, you can ward a site, which I don't think anyone expected. I could be wrong. There was a lot of talk about this mechanic, and it looks like your avatar can be warded, which I think is that looks pretty interesting that could be something that would come into play. So then let's get to this part about what the ward does. If it would be damaged, destroyed, or targeted by a spell or special ability, the ward breaks. And by an opponent, right? So you can still target your warded units and your warded sites with your spells, which is great. You don't break your own wards. That would be silly. But that is a lot of different things. And I think that is what I feel like may be an issue for ward. Damaged, destroyed, targeted by a spell or special ability. And that last one is the one that I don't know, it feels to me like that really potentially weakens the potential of ward. Because any type of special ability that you can basically use every turn means that you can break your opponent's wards very easily. For example, one of my favorite cards, Koinixie. Target unit moves a step towards Koinixie, right? That would target something with ward, that would break the ward. It costs you nothing in terms of, cards. It does cost you the use of the ability, but it doesn't, it's not like you're losing something to it. And I feel like that was kind of the goal of ward. One of the big things early on about sorcery is that there's a lot of removal. You can burrow stuff, or you can bury stuff, you can drown stuff, you can disintegrate stuff, and all of that requires that you target the minion. So with ward, I'm assuming the goal was, okay, we want people to get their stuff on the board and be able to use it, and ward is the way to do that. So, the big thing right now is you need to remove any threat on the board in sorcery, because if you don't, they may drop Grim Gisarm on it, and then you're going to take a boatload of damage. So it's incredibly important to remove all threats on the board so that you don't have to worry about them. Ward would prevent that. In my turn, let's say you've played a minion that has a ward. Okay, now I'm looking at it. It's got a ward. So how am I going to deal with it? If I try to bury it, right, that's going to break the ward, and presumably that spell fizzles and goes to my cemetery, which means I then have to use something else to actually end that minion and end that threat. So that seems like a good thing. I like the idea that, I don't have to worry about my minion with a ward being buried immediately the next turn unless my opponent has to take some extra effort. But there are so many special abilities that target in sorcery or that deal a ping of damage that it's very easy to do that, to remove a ward. So when I look at that, I'm like, seems like this isn't going to be something that necessarily is going to be hugely problematic, especially for certain elements based on the cards that we currently know about. Fire, for example, right? You've got Quarrelsome Kobolds, you've got Colicky Dragonettes. At the end of the turn, they're going to crack those wards. Now, the one thing I do want to say about that is at the end of the turn. So because of that, the threat is still going to be on the board an extra turn. So that's kind of nice. But other effects, again, going back to Koenigsegg, any effect that you can use to kind of target your opponent's units during the course of your turn, basically, I don't want to say for free, but using Koenigsegg's ability, it's just the once, you get to use it once per turn. So it does cost you that, but it doesn't really cost you much else. So you can remove the ward and then use your bury, use your drown, use whatever it is, whatever effect you're going to use to remove that threat. Perhaps it's a minion is going to attack it, whatever it is. So that is, looking at it, I like the would be if it would be damaged or destroyed, the ward breaks instead. I like that. I think that's very cool. Because it, especially in a world where it wasn't just targeted by a special ability or targeted by a spell, which a spell, it's an extra resource. But I like that a little bit better simply because, if, let's say, it was only damaged or destroyed, then I would have to play a damage spell and then attack with a minion or vice versa. So I'm making my opponent spend more resources. So really the big question is, how common is Ward going to become in the meta after Gothic? Is it something we're going to see a ton of? And if so, are these cards that have abilities that you can activate every turn to target something to effectively break the ward, right? Target them with a special ability, boom, you break the ward. Are those cards going to really come into the meta to deal with ward if it's incredibly prevalent in the set? And are there other cards maybe that, what if there's, let's say wards are very, very prevalent and there's a whole deck and you have a deck that's based around wards and you have a lot of tokens and the tokens have wards. That probably isn't going to be the case because, again, these cannot be used by evil. So that whole skeleton token army can't be warded. But let's say we're dealing with soldiers, right? You're dealing with foot soldiers. Somehow you give them all wards. Is a card like Rain of Arrows going to be like, well, now I got to start playing this because somebody might come against me with the foot soldier ward deck? Is that going to be a thing? Now, probably not, but it's an interesting thought. I like the idea that this type of mechanic can bring older cards that never really saw a lot of play into the forefront and bring them and make them important. And even because of the collection mechanic, be something that maybe you want to stick over in the collection, right? Stick Rain of Arrows over in the collection in case you run into the Foot Soldier Ward deck. Could be very neat, very interesting. Quickly remove all those wards, and then you got to have a way to deal with all those foot soldiers. So that's just my thought about, I almost wish it just said damaged or destroyed, but I've got to imagine during playtesting, they were like, if we only do that, it's a little too powerful. So by doing this, where it's also the targeting, it can be removed. It's, maybe that was the balance, right? To make it so that wards could potentially be removed by special abilities that, like Koenigsegg, like Guile Sirens. I'm sure there's other numerous cards like that, right? That can kind of do that type of thing. And then remove those wards. It's going to be a really interesting mechanic. I think I like that it can go on sites. I like that it looks like it can probably go on avatars. I think that's very interesting. I think that could create a very interesting... it could make it so that, everyone was worried about Searing Truth. Searing Truth is just, it's going to make the death blow completely trivial, which, to be honest, look, Lightning Bolt was already out there. Death Blow was already pretty trivial with Fire Bolts and Magic Missile and Lightning Bolt. It had already been trivialized, if that's the concern. Searing Truth is just another thing that's just like those that can make the death blow very easy to achieve. But if you can ward your avatar, okay. And if you have a way to regenerate that ward, like maybe the Savior can do that, give himself wards, that could make getting that death blow all the more difficult. So that I do like. But just that whole extra targeted by a spell or special ability, it's like, man, these things are going to be easy to knock off. Just knock them off. Now, granted, if you're spending a spell, that's good. You're forcing your opponent to spend a spell to get rid of this ward, assuming the spell goes to the cemetery, which surely it does. So that's good. That is, you're going to gain some card advantage there. So that's definitely good. But the targeted by special ability, those cards that have that could really see some additional play. That's kind of the one that I'm like, ooh, oh, Desert. That's the other one, right? Desert, target site, everything takes 1 damage. That'll remove the ward. So those low end ability, people playing a lot of deserts right now because of Atlantean Fate. Now, obviously, we're going to get a ton of new sites. We've already seen some beautiful sites. But, is the desert mechanic going to become, or is playing deserts going to become an even bigger thing? Because you need to have an efficient way to deal with a bunch of wards. That's a big question. So I'm mixed on this one. I'm mixed on this mechanic. I'm not gonzo like I am over the collection. I think it's going to be fun. I'm hopeful that it is something that generating them is, I don't want to say easy, but it's something you can do on a regular basis, right? You can make wards, fairly easily, replace them. And that's the reason why they added in targeted by a spell or special ability there at the end. Because they were like, well, we're going to make them easier to remove by using those special abilities because we're allowing them to be generated, fairly regularly. So be very interesting to see. Very excited for that. Also, super cool that there were like no evil minions can get these. I think that's very neat. And this does seem to point to there is a lot of light in Gothic that we have not seen yet. There are going to be those angels potentially. There's going to be that concept of good. Although I do wonder if maybe the good is going to be outnumbered and that a lot of the cards are going to be evil, but there's going to be this smaller group of cards, maybe, I don't know, 440 cards, maybe 110 of those cards are good and 330 are evil. That would be kind of an interesting split, but just something, something to think about. I think Ward is going to see some play. We've already seen a few cards that have it. And it looks like there's some ways to there was the Virgin that can actually give a ward to an ally. So, will that be worthwhile? It'll be very interesting to see. So that's it. Those are my thoughts. Kind of a mixed bag on Ward. Definitely one of those things. I want to see more cards. I want to see how easy it is to create more wards. I want to see how prevalent it is that, these things can keep coming back, keep being made. If there's something that enhances them in some way, just any of those things, it's just, that's what I need to see with Ward before I'm like, yeah, I really don't like this mechanic, or yeah, I really do like this mechanic. I just want to see more. Hopefully it pans out and it's a great mechanic. That's what we all want, right? We want exciting new mechanics. That's what we want this to be. This one though, it's right now I'm kind of like, well, we'll see. And hopefully now, if it can go on avatars, I think that definitely gives it a leg up. The fact that it goes on sites, I think is extremely interesting. So those things make it look a little bit more positive, but this whole targeted by a special ability seems like that would be pretty easy to remove. It also, because it gets removed by damage, anything that does global damage, right? Not on the scale of Crater Eyes, but Rain of Arrows, anything that can kind of do a burst of damage, of low, cheap damage just to break a bunch of wards. Those may become useful, playable cards. So it'll be interesting to see if that pans out. That's it for today. As always, keep on contesting the realm!